Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever in the world you are. Yesterday, I was talking about the scenes in Parliament, Zimbabwe Parliament. These were the MDC members being manhandled and taken out of Parliament building. We have had MDC members arguing that they are fighting for change. They're fighting for democracy. The truth of the matter is, these individuals are fighting to keep their gravy train seats. MDC/CCC stopped fighting for democratic change during the GNU, if not before that. They had the golden opportunity to implement the democratic reforms. They failed to implement even one. That point has got to be emphasized. And to pretend otherwise is to completely miss the point. That point has to be emphasized, and people must understand. The GNU was our get out of jail card. And when you fail to use your get out of jail card, there's no point in talking about the thickness of the walls, the height of the walls, the razor sharp fences on top, etc., etc. You're not being asked to break out of jail. You've got a get out of jail card. The question is, why did you fail to use it? The truth of the matter is, MDC leaders were bribed by Robert Mugabe, and they forgot all about the reforms. That is the bottom line. That is the truth. And for these people to keep on pretending that somehow they are still fighting for the basic democratic rights of the ordinary people is being naive, to say the least. That is not true. Since my discussion yesterday, I've been bombarded by mostly CCC supporters who are adamant that CCC is still fighting in the people's corner. I still maintain my position that they are not. And I think the sooner the people of Zimbabwe woke up to that reality, the sooner the nation can really get to grips with the challenges that we are facing. I would like to address 2 points or 3 points that were raised by some of the people who bombarded me with their comments today. One of the issues is that I should stop blaming CCC for failing to implement the reforms and for participating in rigged elections. Well, I'm not interested in syntax and semantics. Let's focus on the facts. The facts is that MDC/CCC have been on the political stage since the launch of the party in 1999. Now 23 years, including 5 years they were in the GNU. They have failed to implement even one token reform. That is a fact. The second point is, ever since the GNU debacle, they've participated in these flawed elections, knowing fully well that the process is flawed, knowing fully well that by participating, they're giving ZANU-PF legitimacy. I have quoted people like Tendai Biti, David Calder saying the same thing. And this is exactly what has been happening on the ground. They participated in these elections. They've never won power, but by participating, they've given ZANU-PF legitimacy. Now, somebody decides to call that blaming CCC for failing to implement the reforms, for participating in flawed elections. But blaming, to me, sounds like I am accusing them of something they did not do, or they did not do and it was not their fault. Let's handle the first one. If they did implement the reforms, then please name the reforms they implemented. If they did not, they're not participating in these flawed elections out of greed, then where are they participating? When they know that the process is flawed, that by participating, they're giving legitimacy to ZANU-PF. Blaming is the wrong word. You cannot say somebody are blaming somebody when all you're saying is, this has happened, account for it. These people are trying to run away from, they don't want MDC, CCC leaders to be held to account. So by saying, oh, you're blaming them, they want to give the impression that CCC have done nothing wrong. Well, they've done something wrong. They failed to implement the reforms. They've done something wrong. They're participating to give ZANU-PF legitimacy. They should account for it. Some of them have given all manner of excuses why MDC leaders have failed to implement reforms. Feeble excuses. Because the GNU was the golden opportunity to implement the reforms. The opportunity to implement the reforms during the GNU cannot be compared to before or after. Because during the GNU, any one of the MPs, senators, ministers, deputy ministers could submit reform proposals. They failed to submit even one reform proposal because Mugabe bribed them. That is the truth. We need to get on with our lives and get on with it. In one of my other program video, I have discussed Atham Tambara, who has come up with the same admission that during the GNU, the MDC people took their eyes off the ball. And if you are interested in it, you can research in some of my videos, and I'm sure you'll find it. So that is the wrong word. Blame is trying just to cover up so that the CCC leaders are not held to account. They must be held to account. That is the democratic requirement. And that is not negotiable. The other aspect that I've been bombarded with is that I should not be holding CCC to account, because I must bring your own solution on the table and not just hold Nelson Chamisa and others to account. Well, that is another feeble excuse for saying that we should not hold these people to account. This is all too familiar. We've heard it from ZANU-PF nincompoops like George Jaramba, Chris Msangwa, and so forth. In their case, they use the same argument to justify why ZANU-PF must stay in power. In their case, it's because ZANU-PF is the part of liberation, the party that fought the liberation war. As if to say those who did not fight in the liberation war have no democratic right to hold ZANU-PF to account. Of course they have. And this kind of nonsense must be dismissed wherever it comes from. The democratic right to hold those in power to account is not conditional to, you can only hold them to account if you fought a solution or if you fought in the liberation war. Or as some of the CCC supporters would say, if you are in the trenches or if you're on the ground. So those who have left the country, you cannot hold CCC to account because you have left the country. Holding people to account is a right that is not negotiable, that is not conditional. If you do not want, if you don't like the heat, you can't stand the heat, don't be in the kitchen. If you are in the kitchen, then you have got to account what you're doing there. It is that simple. If you hold public office, you must account for what you are doing while you are there, for what you have done while you are there. To start coming up with all these feeble excuses for why you should not be held to account is totally unacceptable and must be rejected with the contempt it rightly deserves. So to come back to our issue of CCC leaders who are in parliament right now fighting like wildcats, they are not fighting for democratic change. They are fighting to keep their golden train seats. That is totally different. And people must not be deceived into believing that those people are fighting for us. They are not. If the CCC leaders were fighting for the democratic right, they should have known that participating in an election process that is so flawed, that is so illegal, it cannot produce a legitimate government, is totally nonsensical. And that is exactly what they did. Even if we pretend that they did not know the process was flawed and illegal to the point it cannot produce a legitimate government, the AU, SADC's own election observers, and our own Zimbabwe Human Rights Commission, who observed the elections, all came out with the same conclusion, that the process was so flawed, so illegal, it could not possibly produce a legitimate government. That did not stop these CCC MPs taking the oath of office, taking up their gravy train seats. The gravy train seats that they're now fighting like wild cats to hang on to. They literally got to be prized off those gravy train seats. The fighting that is taking place, resulting in all these MPs being recalled, is an internal matter. Let's be clear on that one. There's nothing to do with ZANU-PF, albeit that ZANU-PF is taking advantage of it. It is an internal matter, a CCC matter, and it is a matter of their own making. Many times, many people have told Chamisa when he launched his CCC that he must have a democratic constitution, have structures, and have properly elected officials. He refused, arguing that he was using this strategic ambiguity, where nobody knew what was happening, who was in what position. Well, this is the same strategic ambiguity that has backfired, because this individual, Sengezo Zabango, has claimed that he was the Secretary General of CCC and claimed that the same process that elected Chamisa himself to become president of that party was the same process that elected him as Secretary General. Chamisa and his friends failed to produce the evidence to prove that Zabango was not telling the truth. This is what has resulted in all these recalls. So the recalls are a result of Chamisa's own strategic ambiguity policy backfiring, and to try to blame it on ZANU-PF, except the diehards CCC supporters. Nobody else is going to believe it. And these wildcats hanging on to their seats are not fighting for democracy. If they were fighting for democracy, then they should have known that those elections, were the August elections, were so flawed and so illegal, they could not produce a legitimate government, and they would not have wanted to be part of that government then. They took up their seats out of greed, period. And we need to accept that. I'd like to turn on to a comment here from Kampala. Kampala says, who is in control at CCC, honestly? So the MPs will not take orders from their leader. These are telltale signs CCC can be as corrupt if given the reins of power. Well, I totally agree with you. The refusal to have a democratic constitution was the first indication that CCC is not a democratic party. The argument that they fear that ZANU-PF will infiltrate them if they got a constitution, it's it has backfired, as we've seen. And secondly, you do not say we don't want the rule of law for fear that somebody will take advantage of it. The rule of law, you want it to protect yourself against those who are lawless. Because when there is no rule of law, the lawless will make the rules as they go along. The primary reason Chamisa did not want a constitution, properly elected officials, etc., is the same reason Robert Mugabe was running, the same way Robert Mugabe was running ZANU-PF. Anyone can go into the history of ZANU-PF. You'll find none of the senior leaders in ZANU-PF were ever elected in a democratic way. None. By the time the party would go on to elect the leader, Robert Mugabe himself, he would have been nominated by all the provinces, so that instead of it being an election, it's always a coronation. Chamisa himself did not want a democratic party because he feared that would undermine his own position. Well, in the end, by having no constitution, he has found himself in a position where it's undermined even more. Because Savangu has claimed the same power as he himself has claimed, using the same murky, undemocratic way of assuming power, which Chamisa himself used. So it has backfired on him. And in any case, CCC, people were supporting CCC, not to be just another version of ZANU-PF, but because they wanted it to be a democratic party that respects rule of law. That is exactly why they wanted it. And so it was a letdown that CCC turned out to be just another autocratic party, a one-man band. So to come back to the argument I was making before, we, the people of Zimbabwe, have got to realize that CCC is not going to implement any meaningful democratic reforms. They failed to do so during the GNU when they had the golden opportunity to do so. And to think that they will do so now is naive. And to think they can do it in the present system where ZANU-PF is illegitimate is an outrage. By hanging on desperately, fighting like wild cats to stay in parliament, this can only send the wrong message. So if Zimbabweans are happy with the present political system, why should the world be fighting for change in Zimbabwe? These CCC leaders are not fighting for democracy and good governance in Zimbabwe. They are only fighting to keep their gravy train seats and thus perpetuate the ZANU-PF dictatorship. That is my message tonight. Thank you very much for listening, and good night.